After her husband died, the world around the widow seemed to lose its color. The days no longer felt like days, only long stretches of survival. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, not because she had hope, but because hunger and worry never let her sleep. The man who once stood beside her, who shared her burdens and dreams, was gone, leaving behind silence and responsibility that felt heavier than her own body. Their house stood at the edge of the village, small and broken, with cracked walls and a roof that leaked whenever it rained. It was old, weak, and falling apart, just like her life. Yet, this house was everything she had. It was the last thing her husband left behind. Every corner carried his memory, the place where he used to sit in the evenings, the doorway where he once smiled as he came home. To the world, it was just a poor widow's hut. To her, it was safety, love, and loss all tied together. Her twin daughters were the only light left in her dark life. They were young, fragile, yet full of quiet strength. When she looked at them, she felt pain and hope at the same time. Pain because she did not know how she would raise them alone. Hope because they were her reason to breathe, to work, to endure another day. Even when her body ached and her heart felt empty, their small hands holding hers gave her the strength to stand again. The village, however, showed little kindness. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Some pitied her, others judged her. People spoke as if her fate was her fault, as if being a widow was a weakness she chose. Doors closed slowly. Help never came easily. As a woman alone, she learned that sympathy fades fast, and survival depends only on one's own strength. At night, when her daughters slept beside her, she allowed herself to grieve. Silent tears soaked into her worn pillow. She missed her husband, the life they planned, the security she once felt. But she never cried during the day. It was cruel to weak women, and she could not afford to break. In her quiet pain, she made one promise to herself. No matter how hard life became, she would protect her daughter's future. Even if it cost her everything. This promise, born from loss and love, would soon demand a sacrifice she never imagined. The twins were different from other children in the village. Even in poverty, their eyes shone with questions. They listened closely whenever someone spoke, memorizing words as if knowledge itself were food. At night, they sat beside their mother under the weak glow of a kerosene lamp, tracing letters in the dust on the floor. Old notebooks, thrown away by others, became their treasures. Torn pages were stitched together with care, as if they held a future inside them. For the widow, education slowly became more than schooling, it became a dream of escape. She saw in her daughters what she never had, a chance to break free from the life that had crushed her. Each time they came home excited about something they learned, her heart filled with quiet hope. Maybe her daughters would not have to beg, suffer, or bow their heads the way she had. Maybe knowledge could open doors that poverty had locked for generations. But dreams are fragile when hunger stands at the door. School fees began to pile up like silent threats. Their uniforms grew thin, patched again and again until the cloth could barely hold. Some days, the girls went to school with empty stomachs, their faces brave but pale. The widow often skipped meals so her daughters could eat. She smiled in front of them, hiding the ache in her body and the fear in her heart. Soon, letters from the school arrived, firm, cold reminders that education was not free. The widow read them again and again, her hands trembling. Each word felt heavier than the last. She tried everything. She worked longer hours, borrowed small amounts, and swallowed her pride. Still, it was never enough. At night, she lay awake listening to the sound of the wind slipping through the broken walls of their house. The roof leaked when it rained. The floor was cold. Yet, this weak shelter was all they had. Without it, they would be nothing. Without education, her daughters' lives would repeat her own suffering. The truth became impossible to ignore. As she watched her daughters sleep, their books clutched close to their chests, tears filled her eyes. A mother's heart knows pain deeper than words. The choice before her was cruel, unfair, and final. And with dawn approaching, she knew the time to decide was drawing dangerously near. The thought refused to leave her mind. No matter how hard the widow tried to push it away, it returned each night like a shadow. Selling the house. The idea felt like betrayal of her past, her husband, and the life they once shared. She would sit alone after her daughters fell asleep, staring at the cracked walls, asking herself the same painful question again and again. How could she sell the only thing her husband ever gave her? This house had seen her happiest days. It was here she became a wife, here she learned what love felt like. She remembered laughing in this small space, cooking simple meals, dreaming simple dreams. Even after her husband died, the house had protected her. When storms came, it stood between her children and the cold. When the world turned its back on her, these walls still belonged to her. Losing it felt like losing him all over again. But the world outside was not kind to memories. School fees kept rising. The headmaster's warnings grew sharper, less patient. Letters spoke of expulsion if payments were not made soon. Each word cut deeper than the last. The widow's heart pounded every time her daughters left for school, afraid that one day they would return early, eyes lowered in shame. The village whispers grew louder too. People questioned her choices, her strength, her worth. A poor widow educating daughters was seen as foolish, even arrogant. She worked harder than ever, yet money slipped through her hands like sand. Hunger became a familiar guest. Pride had already been swallowed, but dignity still remained, and it was slowly breaking. She knew the truth now. No amount of extra work could save both the house and her daughter's education. One evening, as rain leaked through the roof, soaking the floor, her daughters sat close together, studying by dim light. Their faces were tired, but their focus never broke. In that moment, something inside the widow shifted. The day the house was sold, the widow did not look back. If she had, she might have fallen to the ground and never stood again. With a small bundle of clothes and her daughters holding her hands, she walked away from the place that once gave them shelter. From that moment on, the word home lost its meaning. They moved from one borrowed space to another. Some nights they slept on cold floors in distant relatives' houses. Other times, they stayed in corners of half-built rooms or empty sheds. Each place came with silent judgment. They were reminded again and again that they were not welcome for long. The widow bowed her head, thanked people, and endured the shame quietly. She had learned that pride had no place in survival. The daughters felt the change deeply. They did not understand why they no longer had a room of their own, why their mother looked more tired each day. Guilt grew inside them like a heavy stone. They wondered if their dreams had destroyed their mother's life. Yet, with this guilt came a fire. They studied harder, walked longer distances to school, and refused to complain. Success became their way of apologizing. The widow's body slowly began to weaken. Long hours of work, little food, and restless nights drained her strength. Pain settled into her bones. Sometimes her vision blurred, and her hands shook as she worked. But she never let her daughters see her struggle. When they were near, she forced a smile, speaking gently, standing tall. A mother's love taught her how to hide pain better than any skill. At night, when the girls slept, she allowed herself to breathe. Fear whispered cruel questions into her mind. What if this sacrifice meant nothing? What if her daughters failed? What if she lost everything and gained nothing? These thoughts terrified her, but she pushed them away. Hope, even fragile, was the only thing keeping her alive. Despite the hunger, the shame, and the endless exhaustion, something inside her refused to break. She believed that one day, her daughters would understand the price she paid. One day, the pain would make sense. As dawn broke over another borrowed roof, the widow rose quietly to face another day, homeless, tired, but still holding on to hope that her sacrifice would someday be worth it.
Time did not move gently. It rushed forward, carrying the daughters away from their mother and into a world she could only imagine. Years passed, and the little girls who once clung to her hands grew into young women with heavy bags and bigger dreams. When the day came for them to leave for higher education, the widow stood still, her heart torn between pride and fear. She smiled as they walked away, even though every step felt like a piece of her life leaving with them. After they were gone, the silence became unbearable. The widow remained behind in the village, alone with her thoughts and memories. Letters and short messages came when they could, but they were rare and brief. Distance turned love into longing. She waited for news the way farmers wait for rain, hoping, praying, and afraid of disappointment. Her days were filled with hard labor. She cleaned houses, washed clothes, and worked wherever she was allowed. The work was tiring, and the pay was small. Often, her hands ached so badly she could barely sleep. Some days, she fell ill, but had no choice except to keep going. There was no one to rest for her, no one to ask how she was feeling. Illness became something she endured quietly, just like everything else. At night, emotional emptiness wrapped around her like a cold blanket. She missed the sound of her daughters' voices, the mess of their books, the warmth of their presence. Sometimes she wondered if they still thought of her, or if their new lies had erased her from their hearts. These thoughts hurt more than hunger ever did. Yet, despite the pain, she never lost faith. Every morning, she whispered prayers before starting her work. She believed that patience was her duty, and suffering was her test. Even when doubt crept in her heart, she pushed it away. A mother's sacrifice, she believed, could never be wasted. Still, fear lingered in the quiet moments. What if her daughters failed? What if all she gave up led nowhere? The questions haunted her, but she chose silence over despair. As years passed, the widow grew older, weaker, and more invisible to the world. But deep inside, hope remained alive. She waited, not for riches, but for a sign that her sacrifice had meaning, and that one day, fate would answer her silent suffering. Life away from home was nothing like the twins had imagined. The city was loud, fast, and unforgiving. They shared small, crowded rooms and worked part-time jobs after long hours of study. Many days began before sunrise and ended well after midnight. Hunger followed them here too, but this time it came with exhaustion and fear of failure. They faced judgment at every step. Some classmates looked down on them for their worn clothes and simple speech. Others questioned whether girls from a poor village belonged in higher education at all. Each cruel look and careless word cut deep, but the twins learned to stay silent. They had seen their mother endure worse without complaint. Whenever they felt weak, they remembered her sacrifice. The image of her tired face, her forced smile, and her hands rough from work became their strength. They reminded themselves that quitting would mean her suffering meant nothing. That thought alone pushed them forward when their bodies and minds begged for rest. There were moments when giving up felt easy, when exams felt impossible, when money ran out, when illness struck and no one cared. Some nights, they cried quietly, asking themselves if they were strong enough. Fear whispered that they did not belong here. But love answered louder. Their mother's belief in them became their shield. Though they were twins, their paths began to take shape in different ways. One found comfort in numbers and problem-solving, working tirelessly to master her studies. The other discovered strength in communication and leadership, helping others even when she herself was struggling. Their differences never divided them. Instead, they supported each other, sharing burdens and celebrating small victories together. Slowly, the world began to change. A teacher noticed their dedication. A scholarship opportunity appeared. Good exam results followed sleepless nights. These were small signs, but they felt like miracles. For the first time, hope felt real. The twins held onto these moments tightly. They knew the journey was far from over, but something had shifted. Their hard work was being seen. Their pain was not wasted. As they stood together, facing the future, they felt a quiet confidence grow inside them. The world had tested them and had not broken them. And somewhere far away, their mother's silent faith was finally beginning to bear fruit. Years had carved deep lines into the widow's face. Her hair, once dark and full, was now streaked with gray. Her body moved slower, heavier, as if every step carried the weight of her past sacrifices. Age and hardship had worked together, wearing her down quietly, without mercy. She lived in a small, forgotten corner of the village, in a broken room lent to her out of pity. Few people remember her name now. To the world, she was just another poor, old woman, invisible, easily ignored. Children passed her without greeting. Neighbors rarely asked how she was. Society had moved on, leaving her behind. Her health had worsened. Some days, pain shot through her chest without warning. Other days, dizziness forced her to sit wherever she stood. She had no savings, no family nearby, and no strength left for hard labor. The jobs she once relied on were no longer offered to her. Hunger returned, sharper than before. One evening, as she struggled to carry a small bag of food, her legs gave way. She collapsed onto the dusty ground, breath heavy, heart racing. No one rushed to help. People watched from a distance, unsure, uncomfortable. In that moment, she felt smaller than she ever had before. As she lay there, a painful question rose in her mind. Was it all worth it? Had she sold her home, her health, her dignity, only to be forgotten? Doubt crept into her heart, whispering cruel thoughts. Maybe she had given too much. Maybe love had cost her everything. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain alone, but from loneliness. She thought of her daughters. Were they safe? Were they happy? Did they remember the mother who gave up everything for them? Or had life carried them so far away that she no longer mattered? She closed her eyes, unsure if she could stand again. Fear wrapped around her like darkness. For the first time, her faith wavered. As night fell and the village lights dimmed, the widow remained there, weak, unseen, and uncertain of what tomorrow would bring. Far from the quiet village, the daughters' lives had begun to change. Years of struggle, sleepless nights, and silent tears had finally led to success. Their hard work did not go unnoticed anymore. Certificates were earned. Opportunities appeared. For the first time, the future felt steady beneath their feet. Yet, with success came reflection. As they looked back on the long road behind them, memories of their mother grew sharper. Small moments returned to their minds. Her tired smile, her empty plate at dinner, the way she always stood strong no matter how weak she felt. Slowly, they began to understand the true cost of their education. The truth reached them in pieces. A conversation with an old neighbor. A passing comment about the house that was once theirs. Then the full picture came together, heavy and painful. Their mother had sold the only home she owned. She had chosen homelessness so they could study. Guilt struck hard. It sat deep in their hearts, mixing with gratitude and love. They realized that while they were building their future, she had been losing everything. The thought made it hard to breathe. How could they ever repay a sacrifice like that? From that moment on, their success no longer felt complete. It felt borrowed. Quietly, without telling anyone, the daughters began to plan. They worked harder, saved carefully, and made decisions with purpose. Every step was guided by one goal: to restore their mother's dignity. They spoke little of it, afraid that speaking too soon might break the fragile hope they carried. At night, they shared memories and regrets. They promised each other that their mother would never suffer again. This promise became stronger than any ambition or personal dream. Love turned into determination. The world had tested them, but now fate was shifting. What once felt unfair was beginning to balance. The daughters knew the journey back to their mother would not be simple, but they were ready to as they stood at the edge of a new chapter. One truth was clear: everything they had achieved belonged first to the woman who gave up everything for them. And soon, they would make sure she finally received what she deserved. The day the daughters returned to the village, the air felt heavy with memory. Dust rose beneath their feet as they walked familiar paths they had not seen in years. Everything looked smaller now, quieter, yet their hearts pounded as if the ground itself remembered them. They found their mother sitting outside a worn room, her body bent, her hands thin and trembling. Tom had not been kind to her. The strong woman they remembered now looked fragile, almost breakable. For a moment, they stood frozen, afraid that if they moved, the moment might disappear. The widow looked up slowly, her eyes tired and unsure. At first, she did not recognize them. Then something shifted. Her breath caught. Disbelief filled her face, followed by a rush of emotion too powerful for words. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she struggled to stand. The daughters reached her before she could fall. They held her tightly, as if afraid the years might pull them apart again. In that embrace, pain, guilt, and love collided. The world around them faded. Neighbors watched quietly, sensing the weight of the moment. The widow's heart overflowed with relief. Her children were safe. They were standing before her, strong, confident, alive. All the nights of hunger, the shame, the loneliness suddenly felt lighter. She touched their faces, as if making sure they were real. The daughters, however, saw everything: the weakness in her body, the worn clothes, the deep sadness hidden behind her smile. Each detail pierced them. This was the cost of their education. This was the price their mother paid alone. As they helped her sit, a strange calm settled over them. This reunion was not just a return, it was a turning point. The daughters exchanged a quiet look, heavy with meaning. The time had come. The widow sensed a change. There was something in their eyes she had never seen before: certainty. She did not know what it meant, but hope stirred gently in her chest, as the sun dipped behind the village homes. The change did not happen all at once. It arrived quietly, with care, the way true healing always does. The daughters did not make promises or grand announcements. Instead, they stayed. They cleaned the small room where their mother lived, cooked warm meals, and made sure she rested. For the first time in many years, the widow was not alone. Soon, life began to shift around her. A safer place was arranged, clean, stable, and filled with light. It was not just a roof, it was a return of dignity. Clothes replaced rags. Medicine replaced silent pain. Respect replaced pity. People who once ignored her now greeted her with wonder, realizing who she truly was. The woman who raised two strong daughters through nothing but sacrifice. The widow watched these changes with disbelief. She moved slowly through her new space, touching the walls, feeling the floor beneath her feet. Memories of her old home returned, but this time without pain. This place did not carry loss. It carried peace. More than comfort, her heart was restored. Her daughters cared for her gently, listening to her worries, laughing beside her, holding her hands. For years, she had given love without expecting anything back. Now, that love returned to her multiplied. One quiet evening, as she sat between her daughters, understanding finally reached her heart. All the hunger, the shame, the loneliness, it had meaning. Her sacrifice had not disappeared into silence. It had grown, taken shape, and returned to her in the form of her children's success and devotion. Tears fell freely, not from pain, but from relief. The burden she carried for so long began to lift. Fate had been watching. Time had been testing her. And now, justice was being served, not with anger, but with kindness. The village no longer saw her as a forgotten widow. They saw her strength, her story. Her suffering had earned her honor. As the widow rested, surrounded by warmth and love, she felt something she had not felt in years: contentment. Even after life became gentler, some pain still lived quietly inside the widow's heart. Years of hunger, fear, and loneliness could not disappear overnight. There were moments when memories returned without warning, nights spent crying alone, days of being ignored, the weight of constant sacrifice. These memories had shaped her, leaving marks deeper than the scars on her hands. The daughters carried their own wounds. Guilt often followed them like a shadow. They struggled with the thought that their success had been built on their mother's suffering. At times, they wondered if they deserved the life they now lived. This pain was heavy, but it was also honest. Slowly, healing began through understanding. The widow watched her daughters with new eyes. She saw not just their achievements, but their kindness, patience, and humility. She realized that her suffering had not broken them. It had shaped them into compassionate women. That knowledge brought her peace. In return, the daughters learned to forgive themselves. They understood that their mother's sacrifice was an act of love, not a burden meant to cause guilt. Accepting this truth was not easy, but it was freeing. Love, they realized, was never meant to be repaid with pain. Across generations, something shifted. Old wounds softened. Tears were shared without shame. The family grew closer, stronger through honesty rather than silence. The widow felt lighter, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. Looking back, they all saw how suffering had taught them empathy. Hardship had made them gentle with others. Pain had deepened their capacity to love. What once felt cruel now held meaning. In the quiet moments they shared, a simple truth became clear: love grows when it is given without expectation. The widow's sacrifice had multiplied, returning not just as comfort or security, but as healing, unity, and peace. As the past loosened its grip, the future opened with warmth. The family moved forward, no longer close. The widow's life no longer moved in silence. Though her body remained fragile, her spirit stood tall through the lives of her daughters. Everywhere they went, her sacrifice followed them, not as pain, but as purpose. She had planted seeds in broken soil, and now those seeds had grown into strength, wisdom, and compassion. Her daughters carried her story with them, in the way they treated others, in the patience they showed, in the respect they gave to those who struggled. They never forgot where they came from or the price that had been paid so they could stand where they were. Their success was not just their own. It belonged to their mother, to her sleepless nights and silent tears. Through them, the widow's legacy took shape. She had proven that motherhood is not measured by comfort, but by courage. That education is more than books, is hope, dignity, and freedom. And that the greatest sacrifices are often made unseen, in quiet rooms, by hearts that ask for nothing in return. As time passed, her story reached others. It became a reminder that love can change destinies, that one person's strength can break cycles of poverty and pain. The widow did not see herself as a hero, but the world saw the truth through her children. In her final reflections, she felt no regret. Everything she gave had returned, not as wealth alone, but as peace. Watching her daughters live full, meaningful lives filled her with contentment deeper than any reward. The story ends where it began, with a mother's love. A love strong enough to endure loss, hunger, and loneliness. A love that chose hope when despair was easier. And for those who listen, her legacy remains clear. Sacrifices made with love never fade. They become light, guiding the next generation forward, long after the pain is gone.